Welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you're watching us on our fast-growing YouTube channel, that is Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI publisher Andrew Jones. And joining me is our director of basketball recruiting and analyst, longtime college, AAU, and high school coach. He is David Sisk, and we're here to discuss the news the last 2 days with North Carolina opening the season as the number one ranked team in the country in the Associated Press poll. It's the 10th time, a record of for anybody in Carolina history, that the Tar Heels are number one to begin a season in the AP rankings. And also Tuesday evening, here a little while ago, Carolina voted number one in the ACC preseason predictions. Armando Bacot, Player of the Year, Caleb Love, and Bacot, first team. RJ Davis, second team. And a few Tar Heels actually got a little bit of love for Freshman of the Year, but none of them finished in the top 4 or 5. So, David, let's have a discussion about this. It's just, whenever North Carolina gets something like this, to me, it's historic. It adds to what is an incredible legacy in the program. Anybody that's been in the Dean Dome, just look up and you could spend a half hour and you won't read the same banner twice, because they put stuff up there, and for good reason. It doesn't mean anything in the long term, David, but being number one to start the season, to me, I think means a lot to this club, because it reflects the way they turned last season around and so many of the guys that they have back.
Yeah, and I think number one, it's obviously a combination, but I also think that it's a perfect reminder of how they finished last year. And, when you get to an NCAA tournament champion, a Final Four, an NCAA championship game, it means something, and I remember you talking about last, you and I were having a discussion last spring while this was going on, and you were talking about what it meant for the program historically against other blue bloods. If they got to the Final Four, if they got to the finals, comparing numbers against other programs, if they won a national championship, what would it mean? So everything was historic. I saw the count today of how many preseason, I think AP preseason number ones North Carolina had been. I don't even remember the count now.
10.
Okay. Impressive number. And, that's something else that you can just put on the resume. So like I said, basically a reminder of how they finished last year, but it's based on what they've got coming back to, and we believe, for all intents and purposes, this is a very, very talented lineup. Now, I don't believe anybody's surprised that they're where they're at in the polls.
Well, they've been in 3 of the last 6 NCAA championship games. They won one, they lost one at the buzzer, and they lost another one by 3 points. They led by 15 at the half. So I think that what's interesting is during that span, they haven't been a preseason number one. The last time they were preseason number one was actually in advance of the 2015-16 season. And that club lost in the title game to Villanova at the buzzer. So since then, with the win in 17, and of course, the season last year, they weren't anywhere close. In 17, I guess they were close to number one, but they weren't actually number one. Let me read off the years very quickly. Pretty amazing stuff. 1978, that club actually stumbled early in the NCAA tournament. It was 1982, they won it. When I say 1982, I'm talking about the back half of the season. That was 81-82. That was Jordan, Worthy Perkins, Jimmy Black, Matt Doherty. That club lost the title game in 81, came back and won it the next year. 84 was a club that could have run the table if Kenny Smith doesn't get hurt. It was Jordan's last year, Perkins last year. They got upset by Indiana in the Sweet 16. 87 was a team that was number one most of the year. They got beat by Syracuse in a regional final. 94 was the defending national champs, and they were number one going into the tournament, and they were upset by Boston College. 2008 was a club that was phenomenal. They got to a regional final in 07. The 08 team lost to Kansas in the Final Four. That was the 40-12 game. 09 won it all. 2012, that club got to a regional final. That was Kendall Marshall's broken wrist. I think they would have been on a collision course with Kentucky otherwise. And then, of course, 2016 and this year. Number 2 is Gonzaga. Number 3, Houston. Number 4,
Let me ask you a question. Did you?
Yeah.
I got a feeling you didn't read that off.
I did read it off, yeah. But
Okay.
I know what they.
I was
I read
impressed.
the.
I can't
read the
remember where I put
years.
my car keys. That was impressive.
See, I don't remember important stuff like that, but I remember this kind of stuff. I have the years here, but I know what each one of those teams did. Gonzaga number 2, Houston number 3. Kelvin Sampson's got a great thing going there. Kentucky number 4, Baylor, Kansas tied for number 5. Houston, that's the basketball in that part of the country. Fantastic. Outside of Carolina, Kentucky, the rest are west of the Mississippi. So that's pretty fascinating. So David, just when you hear that, and all those teams had really good years, they were all number 1 later in the year. So what does that tell you about what a number 1 preseason ranking means, especially when it's in North Carolina? Some programs don't know how to handle hype. This one, Kentucky, the Kansases, they have a much better understanding of how to handle hype. And they usually come very close to living up to it.
Yeah, but I'll say this too. How well can the fans handle it? So that's the question. So if things don't go, the way they expect, or the rough patches, the blowback can be huge. But yeah, I think one thing that happens is you have other teams when they play North Carolina, when they play Kentucky, when they play Kansas, when they play Duke, and they have that tradition, and here they are, highly ranked teams in now and in the past. They know the history too. And you see a lot of times with 2 or 3 minutes left to go in the game, they'll kind of wake up and say, "Oh gosh, we're not supposed to be here." And yeah. you see that many times. So yeah, it just, like I said, it just adds to the resume. And I think the thing with North Carolina, it's going to be the advantage is you got so many players that did it on the big stage last year. So it's not a Johnny come lately kind of deal. Whereas if you're in college football, and let's say you're at the University of Tennessee, obviously I live in Tennessee, and you've seen what kind of all the hype around them, and it's kind of come out of nowhere, and now all of a sudden they're the hunted, and you've got to go to Georgia in 2 or 3 weeks. We'll see how they handle all that stuff. But this deal, and I'm not trying to go down another trail there, but I'm just making really a contrast, not a comparison. So, like I said, you see North Carolina, they had so many games on the big stage, late in the year. So I think something like that was invaluable, because I don't think a lot of us trusted that team going into that, because, there were some rough patches last year.
They were never consistent.
A year ago, about this time a year ago, man, I mean, everybody was on. I mean, you were hiding the sharp knives. So, you weren't letting anybody get on bridges, close to ledges, anything like that. So, you just kind of have a different feel this year. And I think obviously it's because of success, but experience is one thing, but successful experience is
exactly
a whole different ball of wax.
Very quickly, 47 to 62 first place votes for the number 1 ranking. Carolina there have been 75 years of the AP poll, David. They've been ranked at least once in 66 of them.
Wow.
They have been number 1 in 21 different, at least 1 week in 21 different seasons. Let's jump over to the ACC. I voted in that poll. I did vote Carolina first in that one. I also had Armando Bacot as player of the year, and I had Armando and Caleb Love first team All-ACC. Carolina, 90 of 101 first place votes, first in the ACC. Duke finished second. Duke has 2 first place votes. Virginia finished third with 6 first place votes. Miami fourth with 2 first place votes. That was it. The rest of the pecking order: Florida State fifth, Notre Dame 6th, Virginia Tech 7th, Syracuse 8th, Wake Forest 9, NC State 10, Clemson 11, Louisville 12, BC 13, Pitt 14, and Josh Pastner's Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets 15th in the league. Before we do into the all-conference stuff, your just initial thoughts about that as far as the ACC pecking order.
A couple things that stood out to me. Number one, we're going to see Duke on the floor without Coach K. So, John Shire was baptized too early. And we're going to see, what those results are and how he handles. Is there a smooth transition? does it get rocky? Well, everybody's got an opinion, so we're going to see there. The two teams that really where they're at kind of stuck out to me are the two teams from the state of Virginia. First of all, the Cavaliers. Yeah, and I see so many things on Twitter and so many sports writers and so many things that I can't keep them all together. But I saw where one individual said that he had North Carolina. He voted for North Carolina number one in the country, but he voted Virginia number one ACC. So obviously there's some hype there, but man, I'll tell you, Virginia's been a major disappointment the last 2-3 years. So we're going to see how well they bounce back. And even last year when North Carolina was struggling a little bit because during the ACC season, I never really believed that they found it. Even with some big wins, I thought they'd be some bad teams. So we thought, I was honest about that. But with Virginia, when they played, I just never felt like Virginia could beat. I just didn't have a whole lot of faith in that team. I wasn't impressed, especially offensively. They
couldn't score.
And I saw guys out there, and I said, man, this doesn't look to me like guys that Virginia's had on their roster. They just said several guys didn't look to me like ACC players. Yeah. So I still, man, they're going to have a major turnaround if they're that good. The other one's Virginia Tech, who might have been picked a little low. They've been picked by, I've seen a lot of publications and polls and things like that, preseason polls that's had Virginia Tech in the top 20, top 25. And I think you said 7th in the ACC.
Yeah.
So that's surprising that, they would be that low in a conference. And some people think nationally they can be that high. So, evidently some people think there's a floor and some people feel like there's a ceiling. So I'm interested to see which way they play out.
I wonder how much of that is just the fact that the league should have a lot more depth this year. So they could be 7th in the league and still in the top 25 because Notre Dame's got a chance of being really good. Florida State's always going to be good. They defend, and Leonard's he's 74 years old and he still looks 50. And Miami has a chance, I think, to be really good. And
I still like Miami. That's who I like.
Yeah, I'm a big-time Isaiah Wong fan. I think the makeup of this team fits what Larranaga prefers to do, and he's got a little bit of depth. Syracuse, I think, is an interesting team. Wake Forest, I think Wake's a little bit high. I think NC State's a little high. I think Clemson is a club to keep an eye on with Tyson and PJ Hall and some of those guys. And I talked to Brad Brownell at the ACC tip-off last week. I've known Brad since he was at UNCW. And he's like, you know what? I think I have a team that can put the ball in the basket. And he's got some pretty decent depth. So, and they're going to defend and they're going to box out. BC Pitt, Pitt's an older team. They went to the transfer portal and got a lot of guys. I just don't think the Capel experiment's going to work. Your point about UVA, they have all 5 starters back. I think it's the first time in the Tony Bennett era they returned all 5 starters, including Kihei Clark, who's the one who had the pass that led to the buzzer beater against Purdue in the regional final back during the Reagan administration. So they are an old team. They have a lot of old guys. They got a couple really good freshmen coming in. They're going to be an interesting team to watch. I think the ACC is going to be a lot better. By the way, Duke loaded, but you're right. How's Shire handle that? One difference at Duke, I can tell you right now between Coach K and Shire. K wasn't very accessible, not a lot of media stuff. They were kind of rigid about some of those things. Shire had like 2.5 hours of straight up availability a couple of weeks ago. Players and himself and the media just was able to gorge on all kinds of stuff. It was probably a little too long. One of the guys who covers Duke tells me that Duke realized, but the fact that Shire's been very open and very accessible, I think is a good thing, because if they struggle a little bit, he's going to need that. He's going to need to be able to continue being open to answer the questions because he will be highly scrutinized. I think he'll be scrutinized more than Hubert was a year ago, in part because a lot of people blame the players at Carolina. They say, oh, those are the guys that forced Roy out of into retirement, which was ridiculous. Shire doesn't really have that. He's got a lot of new guys. These are the kids that he recruited 2 summers ago to come in. They knew they were going to play for him all along. So it's a little bit more of his roster out of the gate than it was Hubert's roster, so to speak.
Yeah, and Duke's got the brand the media markets. So if you look at Duke, man, they go up the East Coast and especially into the big cities up there, Philadelphia, New York City, is a huge Duke area. And
yeah.
ESPN is you look at the Duke with Jay Billis, Jason Williams, and you look on down at the huge Duke presence at ESPN. And like I said, it's an East Coast media market, and Duke's been able to build that brand like nobody else. That it's been a blessing so far, but it can also be a curse because when things go bad, that's going to be blown out of proportion as well. Just all the Duke love that's really turned a lot of people against them. So, like I said, and that's one thing. As a new coach, he's in a fishbowl where he's got no place to hide. Exactly. So you talk about stepping into the fire, man. He's there.
Carolina, by the way, used to be that when Brad Daugherty and Hubert Davis were at ESPN, and they don't have that presence as much anymore. I guess they have to lean on Kenny Smith with the TNT stuff. First team All-ACC, Armando Bacot, Isaiah Wong, we just talked about him, Caleb Love, Terquavian Smith from NC State, so really, really interesting player, and Jeremy Roach from Duke. A lot of people surprised that he got on the first team. I voted for PJ Hall from Clemson to be on the first team. Second team is Jaden Gardner from Virginia, Derek Lively, the freshman at Duke, Justin Mutz, you're talking about Virginia Tech guys, he's back with the Hokies and 500 college degrees, PJ Hall from Clemson, and RJ Davis. Player of the year, Bacot was first. He was the runaway winner with that. Wong finished second, Love third, Roach fourth, and PJ Hall fifth. So what are your thoughts about first and second team and the POI?
I really don't get in as far as there's so many good players as far as the all-conference team. But the thing that probably catches my interest a little bit, I've not been here at Tar Heel Illustrated long, but I've been here long enough to where I still remember another preseason ACC player of the year, and that was Garrison Brooks.
Yeah.
God knows we all hope this one turns out a little better. So,
you know what? Armando was asked about that last week at the ACC tip-off, figuring he was expecting to be that. He's like, I don't know if I want that. A lot of those guys haven't been all that successful.
Well,
I'm not sure I want the award.
He was right, but I never saw the other one because I was just like, man, I don't get it. But he's a good player, but I don't get it. But when Bacot's a real deal. I talked to obviously they had the official visitor, James Brown, over the weekend. And I talked to him Monday night, and which would be last night. And then I said, was there a player that stuck out to you watching practice? And he went, and I said that you may not have known that they were as good as they are. And he said, he said, I knew who Armando Bacot was, but I didn't know he was that good. Yeah. He said he just dominated the glass. He said every shot that went up was his. And he was just talking about his ability to score and his ability to rebound and even step out on the floor a little bit, but just basically insert his will to get his team going.
He should, with barring injury, he should become Carolina's all-time leading rebounder by sometime in early January.
I'm going to say this. I know just as far as talking to people on DM threads that I'm in, the people at other schools, and you've got Oscar Tshiebwe at Kentucky, and they're very bullish on him. But man, I've got people that I'll talk to that watch these, and they're like big Tshiebwe guys, and they're like, man, Armando Bacot is a load. Those two guys. So, I mean, you're talking about big rivals there to North Carolina, and they've got basketball royalty on their roster, and they are very, very complimentary of Armando Bacot. I've not heard one person anywhere else say that he's overrated or he's not as good as the press clippings or all. I mean, it's just people gush over.
I think he's still finding himself as a player. I really do. And I'm not saying that it's stepping away and hitting three-pointers and stuff. I think being able to catch and shoot in a 15-foot radius around the rim, I think having a little bit more to his game on the block where he doesn't have to pump fake as much, going straight up and hitting some stuff, the left-handed jump hook. I think a lot of that stuff's still there. And by the way, he and Tshiebwe worked out this summer. Yeah, Armando was in Kentucky. We went to the Kentucky Derby, and he and Tshiebwe worked out some. And he said that they're pretty tight. And can you imagine the two of them? Remember those old those old Bud Light beer commercials, the two guys mowing their lawns, they end up playing each other basketball in the driveway,
Oh, yeah.
and they're duking it out and sweating up a storm. No one's watching. Can you imagine the two of them going at it one-on-one with nobody in that gym watching? That would be a sight to see.
But Bacot is just one of those guys to me. I don't know how his NBA career will turn out, but he's one of those guys like Hansborough, that is just so cut out for the college game, that's just going to be an all-time great player, and is just, it's almost like Tim Tebow or Herschel Walker in football. That were just, man, they were in that perfect storm for 3 to 4 years where they were at, and you look at them and you're going, how were they not the greatest football player? How was Herschel Walker? How did he not have 20,000 yards rushing in it? And Bacot's kind of like that. He's in that. He is just perfectly cut out, because the NBA's pretty well got away from the space heater inside. The college game's not. And he is just, the game is totally just made for him to take over down there, and he's done it. And I'm sitting here thinking, Daron Sharp would be a junior right now. And you think about Bacot, you think about how good he would be right now if he was still. Yeah. And but Bacot's a unique talent.
What's interesting too, I'm going to enjoy watching how he and Pete Nance become whatever it is they're going to become by March down there in the lower blocks. A lot of folks are upset with Roy saying he was running an antiquated offense a couple of years ago. That wasn't really so. It's just that his bigs, none of them are really capable of stepping away and creating a little bit more space by doing that. With Nance, they have a guy who can step away, but they're going to play a lot of two guys on the block stuff this year. And in fact, during live action last week, I think it was a week and a half ago, Hubert said one of the reasons that he had Armando and Nance on the same team at live action, which some people call it unfair, or at least unequal with the lineups out there, was because they need to play as many minutes as possible together in a game type setting. Because one has spent 4 years in college playing without Armando. The other one has spent 3 years in college playing without Nance. So they got to speed up some of that chemistry. So how they learn to play off of each other is going to be interesting, because Nance is going to be in the paint more than Manek was. A lot of stuff he gets is going to originate from the paint. Manek would hang out on the perimeter. I bet you a lot of Nance's perimeter shots are shots that begin with him in the paint and he comes out, instead of Manek always just being out. So he's going to have to play off Armando when he's doing those things.
Yeah, and one thing I like Nance too, you remember we had the comparisons. A lot of people asked us back in the spring and summer, well, would you rather have Nance or would you rather have Mayer from Baylor? And, I was one of the guys that said Nance all along. I thought he was a better fit to play with Bacot for what you needed to have. But when I was talking about, well, they need a 4, maybe a guy can stretch, and I was thinking about the Manek role, you kept saying, well, they need some beef inside and somebody special. So I think one thing that Nance can do too is step down on the block, because I watched a lot of tape out of him in the Big Ten. And I noticed he guarded the 5 a lot at Northwestern, and he played down there. But I noticed, and you see a gauntlet of big-time centers in the Big Ten every night.
Big time.
And he banged. Well, I'm watching him push guys way out on the floor. That's supposed to be strong as an ox in his lower base. And, he can get leverage. He's not necessarily going to be a shot blocker, but he gets great leverage. And it's just hard to get 2 feet in the paint with him shoving on you. Yeah. So I think that he can spell that time when you don't have to play Bacot 40 minutes, but you can actually have Bacot get a little bit of a rest, and you say, well, who's going to be your other 5? Well, you can slide him down, and now you start looking at playing some of these other guys at the 4. So yeah. I think the combinations that Hubert's going to have there to work with are going to be very interesting. But you're right, they need to get as much time with those 2 together as they can get, because they need to know each other's every move by the time they get into some crunch time games, once we get into 23.
I asked Hubert last week about Nance, and he immediately said, I said, what surprised you about him? You've seen him for 3 months. First thing he said was, well, I'm surprised he's not in the NBA. But then he went on to list a bunch of other things. And one of them was, and I followed up with this question, was his ability to defend the paint. and spell Armando. They didn't have that. The David McCormick shot over Brady Manick is a perfect example. And that's the play that Hubert went to when saying if we have, he's not saying if we had Pete Nance there instead of Brady Manick, the shot doesn't get completed or anything like that. His point was you need a bigger guy in there. And it wasn't so much Manick's length. It was more pushing a guy out, making the shot a little bit more difficult. Nance is strong and could do that. Plus, he's got a little bit more length. You're talking about his leverage. And Armando is really open to it. Armando said last week, I'm not going to play as many minutes. Caleb Love said, I'm not going to play as many minutes this year. And he's the other guy on the first team I wanted to ask you about as well. And speaking with Caleb, and I spent a half hour with him, I know about 20 minutes with him, last week. And one of the things that I took away from that is just the maturity, a different kid than he was 2 years ago. There's maturity and there's an understanding now that he's not in a rush to get wherever he's going to go in basketball. I think he was a couple of years ago. He has a much better understanding of where his game is, where he is in the process to becoming whatever kind of pro player it's going to be, whether it's the NBA, which I think it will be, or if it's going to be overseas. And because of that, I think he's going to have a really good year because this time a year ago, he still didn't really know a whole lot about where his game was. But there's no question right now. He knows it. He's grounded, and I think he's primed to have a fantastic year.
Well, when you're in your third year at North Carolina, you should have some maturity because, you go a year of Roy Williams, you go now in your second year of Hubert Davis, and, time will tell how great of a coach Hubert Davis is, whether he's going to be a legend at North Carolina. But there's one thing about it, and recruits' parents keep telling me this, he's a great mentor. So, he's somebody that you can mature under. And, all these guys from Lebo to Sean May, they were all successful. So Jeff Lebo's got a ton of knowledge and experience to lean on. And you've got all these pros coming back in. You're around successful people all the time. So that should happen. I think maybe last year in a tournament run, he had to take some pressure off. He always played to me like he was trying to prove something, like he really had pressure on him. And I think maybe that's off. I'll tell you one other thing. Maybe the financial pressure's off. When you've got the name and a good NIL package, it's not, you're not sitting there looking ahead and saying, hey, man, I've got, how am I going to make a living out of this stuff? Is it going to pan out? I think just everywhere on the floor, off the floor, it should be in a more, comfortable situation. And what happens when you get in a comfortable situation? Now you can kind of afford to wait a little bit, be more patient. So, he doesn't have to go lunging and everything now.
Yeah, I was impressed with Caleb last week, and I think he's come a long way. And he's one of these guys that's got winning the school in a hurry to get the league, and he's going to look back later on in life. I'm glad it didn't happen exactly that way because of what he's getting out of the college experience. We're going to get into all the different Tar Heels as we preview into the four returning starters. We're going to do a Pete Nance preview. We're going to do a podcast. We're going to do one on the returning reserves and also one on the freshmen that are there now. Lots of very positive things being said about those guys as well. And then we'll have a season preview podcast. The Tar Heels tip off in just a few weeks. Season's almost here. So stay locked to TarHeelIllustrated.com and our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated. We're going to roll out a lot of pods and have a ton of stuff that you can only access on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And just remember, it's just $8.33 a month. You can be an insider too. And also remember, we go wherever the Tar Heels go. He's David. I'm AJ. Thank you for stopping by.